TV.
Welcome everybody, I'm Leon van Rooij and this is a new episode of Playgrounds TV, and today we're going to discuss with a very special guest, Piet Kroon. He's on my list for a long time, so I'm really happy to welcome in our studio, Piet Kroon.
Thank you.
Yes, it's an honor to have you here on my, little talk show room setup. Because I got to know you when I was just kicking off in the animation industry. I was just like starting at the Art Academy.
Yeah.
And one of my first experiences was in the Dutch Institute, the former Dutch Institute of Animation Film. You were recording your film, which was called Dada. And I was like really impressed by the look and the feel and like the production value of it. So that was my first introduction to your work. But before we go dive a little bit more deeper into Dada, can you tell us a little bit briefly about like how did you came to making this animation story and your interest in animation?
I did not go to art school. I'm sort of, I'm self-taught. As a kid, I really loved comics, so I taught myself to draw copying Asterix and Obelix, and I really loved comics. I didn't really care for like superhero comics, so it wasn't like an American thing. And I loved the drawing that's in Disney cartoons. So this is all like way before the internet. So you had to really, it's hard to get your hands on books on how to do it. So you had to sort of find. I would clip pictures from newspapers and make little scrapbooks, collecting anything that I really liked. And but animation was, I think at that point it was almost about to go extinct. It's really hard in the Netherlands to make a living doing animation. There's very little going on, and it didn't feel like a viable, like a choice. Like I'm gonna go do this. So instead, I went to university and I studied film and theater studies, which is a more theoretical approach of drama in theater and in film and TV. And as part of that studies, at one point you had to do a practical, like a 3-month period where you gained some practical experience. And that's when I thought, I love film, I like comics and drawing. Why don't I try and combine these two and do something in animation? And I got in touch with Gerrit van Dijk, who's a very independent Dutch filmmaker.
Yeah, very independent.
And I asked him, Gerrit, I have to do this internship. Maybe I can come and help you make your films. And he said, being very independent, well, you can't help me. I work alone. I do everything myself. But I can help you. So why don't you, come to Haarlem? He lived in Haarlem, and start making a film. And if you run into trouble, I'll help you. That's how I got started. So during my studies, I basically began to try to animate using all this, what little information I had gathered from trying to find books or drawings and understanding what was happening. But you couldn't really, I didn't have access to like movies. I couldn't watch films frame by frame. I didn't have the benefit of the internet. Now you can type in pretty much any question and you get like great explanations from world famous people showing you how it's done. So suffice to say, I made lots of mistakes, and Gerrit really helped me to get the basics down, and that resulted in my first little film. It was all done, on paper, and then you had to transfer the papers onto cells and paint the cells. And it's a 4-minute film with, I think, really a 1-minute story. And I thought it was very original. But later on, I found out the same kind of joke has been done in many other films. But hey, it was my first attempt, and it came out, I guess, half decent. and at least it helped me to get a job in England for a big animation studio that Steven Spielberg was running at the time over there. Amblimation.
Yeah.
And they were doing a sequel to a Don Bluth film, American Tail, so American Tail 2. And I did a test, and I got hired. And so it was like it's an incredible leap, a lucky break, and a big step to go from basically this. I just did my first film to now you're an animator on a American style feature animation film. So I think it was the most paranoid period of my life. I was sitting in London, surrounded by a lot of really young French and English artists who all could draw circles around me. Up until that point in the Netherlands, I was like, in any situation, the guy who could draw, so to speak. There I'm sitting, I'm watching these people do amazing drawings. And there's a Dutch animator called Rob Stevenharen, who was there, and he was one of the lead animators. And he helped me. They all kind of helped me, but I was expecting at any moment to get a little tap on the shoulder to say, well, we made a mistake. Maybe you should go back. But I managed to stick it out, and that's been my break to get to work on a film like that. And it was incredible because a lot of these guys had worked on Roger Rabbit, for instance, and with Richard Williams, which is an amazing film.
Yeah, actually, Steven Spielberg was like hiring all those veterans to set up his studio and to create it, right? So you could work among really talented animators.
Really talented people, but also a lot of like really young. Like you have a thing in animation at Disney, the 9 old men, sort of the 9 lead animators in the classic Disney era. And I was at that studio in Amblimation. I was one of the 9 old men because of my age.
And you were still quite young.
Well, I was getting on 30, I think.
Yeah, that's not that old.
Not that old.
I hope.
Still, it wasn't 18. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So it was a really big leap and great, and I learned a lot of things. And one thing I learned is that animation is really hard. You have to really be able to do at that level. Your drawing skills have to be. You have to You shouldn't have to think about what you're drawing. It should just be completely natural. You should be, focused on bringing it to life. And one interesting thing is I came up with, in one scene I came up with a different idea. And I pitched this idea for a little joke to the director. And he actually liked the idea. He thought it was better than what they had in the script or in the plan, so to speak, at that point. But he said, well, it's a good idea, but we can't do it because Steven Spielberg has signed off on this idea. And that's the end of the conversation, basically. So that taught me that, hey, if I want to help tell the story, I should try and get like at an earlier stage, like in the storyboard phase. And that kind of stuck with me. And afterwards, I went back to Holland and had a chance to do Dada,
which was produced by the wife of unfortunately, Gerrit passed away.
He passed away
several years ago, but his wife, Celia, produced this film for you.
She was like his producer also. That happens a lot in animation in the Netherlands. You marry somebody and help you make a film.
That's what you
exactly. And that was.
And then you were like right from the start. So you were just mentioning, okay, if I'm in Amblimation, I have to be like more on the forefront. So if I want to have my ideas in, I have to do the storyboard. Now you were in a phase that actually you were doing your own story from scratch to the final result.
Yeah, and that was really great. Beforehand, I left Amblimation to go back to Holland to work with Paul Driessen, who's a Dutch, Paul Driessen, a famous Dutch animator who works in Canada and in the Netherlands. And he has a very peculiar style, very sketchy, scribbly. That was like a really big change from working in essentially a Disney style, with the squash and the stretch and everything, to do that kind of thing in his style. If you look at the storyboards there's a couple of storyboard sketches at the bottom. You can really tell that I was heavily influenced or just used drawing scribbly like Paul Dries. And then when I did the final film, it turned into more of a cartoon style. Because that worked better for the story. But yeah, that was like it was sort of like, in a sense, I think Paul's work really influenced me in the sense that he often has a very simple visual idea in his stories and just explores that and uses it, wrings all the entertainment and all the ideas out of it you can. And this story was about basically a world where people carry books on their heads, and the more books you carry, the more intelligent you seem. And that's kind of a very simple story, and I explored a lot of different possibilities. What kind of books could you be carrying? What could it mean?
Yeah, and because the premise of the film was the idea was also that from the little kid one, no book was matching it. Huh?
Yeah,
so,
it's the one
he had
kid
a problem.
who, and then it's a sort of it's about parenthood also, I guess, in the end. And funny thing was that it was as I was animating this, my first son was born, so it suddenly became autobiographical. Yeah. But it's great to be able to do a film, and this was like funded through the film fund in Holland.
Yeah.
You have a great chance to make something.
Which was back then the only way to have these kind of projects financed, right? Yep. There was no commercial industry. There were no, how do you say, in the advertising world, it was like also almost not doable, and there was no actually Dutch animation scene, right? There were a few people working more independently. Maarten Koopman, Gerrit van Dijk, T.R.A.N.S.I.T. They were like independent animators, but there were no industry.
There was a little bit of commercials were being done, but the trouble was that London was too close by. So all these art agencies, if they wanted to do animation, they we could take a weekend, go to London, and in London, every street corner there would be like an amazing little animation studio with very talented people and with distinct styles. And there would be Dutch little studios like Comic House who were able to do many different styles when given the opportunity, but it was opportunities were rare.
Yeah, it was a really small scene back then.
So that's where Wilbert Pleinaar worked a lot with Comic House, for instance. I did some work with them. Just little things happening, but it wasn't like a serious. You couldn't make a living. It didn't feel like you could, like a safe bet, And I think a lot of that has changed.
Now there are like hundreds of studios and different kind of courses, educational courses in animation. So it totally changed within that 25 years or even more. But then you took the big leap, and you thought, okay, this doesn't work out in the Netherlands, at least not the ambition that I have within the animation industry.
Well, you make it sound like a conscious.
Now we go to the next slide.
It's a bit more of like I finished Dada.
Yeah,
and now I had a real kid, and it was I had to make a living, But really I got very lucky, because at that point in time is a time when Disney came out with The Lion King, and The Lion King made incredible amounts of money for Disney, and it kind of woke up all the studios in America that they wanted to get make that kind of money too, so they all started to start big animation studios, and all of a sudden, where America normally is very hard to get into if you come from abroad, the industry there opened up, and it was able to, they were looking for people all over the world, sending recruiters out.
And different studios like Amblimation, Sony, they all started their own animation.
DreamWorks and Warner Brothers was where me and Wilbert were both at almost the same plane. We moved to Warner's, and but it was like an animator, and it was like it was incredible. You got like a multi-year contract and a signing bonus. If you signed on a dotted line, you get like extra money. They would pay for your move. So it was very. It wasn't like I wasn't a pioneer. Like I didn't leave behind Holland and went out. It was a pretty it's a
Logical step
a safe
to do.
jump.
Yeah.
But it was animation. I was supposed to be animating, just like at Amblimation, to do the actual drawings in pencil. But my luck was that when I got there, the film they were about to do, called Quest for Camelot, wasn't ready to be to go into animation yet. So it was still in story.
Pre-production.
Everybody who arrived there had sort of by default went into storyboarding, and that's where I had a chance to show my storyboarding skills. And I was really lucky also that I'd done Dada, which is was a funny film, and it was supposed to make people laugh, and it kind of worked. So I had proof, even though I didn't speak English, and in story it's a lot about, you have to be sort of a salesman, you have to pitch your ideas and sell them and convince people that they should listen to you. And all of that is difficult if English isn't your first language. So Wilbert and I were speaking, we were cursing our heads off because the word fuck is very handy. But it's not something you say in England or in America
States, yeah.
normally. So they were all like, "Oh, these guys are serious," because we had to
You were swearing a lot, so they took you very
improvise.
serious.
Well, and then he does. I don't know what the fuck he's doing, but he's doing something. That was a funny thing you have to really sort of tune in to the culture there. And I started doing storyboards on Quest for Camelot, and I basically never went back to animation. And animation is a lot more. You have to be a way better draftsman to do that convincingly at that level. And storyboarding is about the ideas, and the sketches are not meant to be seen by anybody. It's just a ways to express ideas and jokes and possibilities, and so that suits me well. I can draw it. I don't have to be too precious about whether it's a great drawing or if I have an off day, it's okay.
Yeah, you did that for a lot of big productions, right? So we're talking here. There's like a few. We have like Despicable Me. You have Ice Age. You have the Iron Giants. You have Rio. All this like big, blockbuster kind of projects. And you were involved by telling the stories.
This slide actually sort of shows you get a script, and then you have to sort of visualize it, and you have designs that you can use, of course. Ideally what the space looks like that the scene takes place in, and what the characters look like. But you have to sort of decide in the storyboarding where you put the camera, how you break down the scene. You have to explore the acting. You get the personality of the characters, and everything is, of course, has to be entertaining. You have to make it fun and.
Because how do you work? Like more from a process perspective. This is a scene from Despicable Me. Here you see the original script. Probably this is what you receive.
And you get a brief from the director, and they tell you as much as they know, and you get to read the whole script. I don't know if when I worked on Despicable Me, it was really early on, because you see the main character, it's all designed by Carter Goodrich. Doesn't look at all like he does in the final films, because it's like an earlier
adaptation of it.
Version. And you get the script, you get marching orders, like we're looking, this is important, and then it's basically you have to boldly go when no man has gone before, and do something. And you make mistakes, and in a sense that is the purpose. You go in, you give the scene a workout and explore possibilities, and very often becomes way too big and way too involved, and we just shouldn't really think about that, because that's like the next step is editing it down, and the director gets in and chooses like, okay, we skip this bit, but we go for this bit. So you're really sort of molding it in sketches when it's still cheap. Animation gets very expensive. You never want to make something you're not actually going to use. So storyboarding is a process of seeing if it's worth it to
prototype the story and to pick the best prototyping of it.
And I really love it, because it's very free, and you get to invent new characters. Like in the Ice Age films, the Scrat character was never scripted. Gilbert Planner again was pretty instrumental in it early. I think he worked on the second film.
I heard, but maybe it's a gossip that at first it wasn't funny enough, so they actually thought we need an extra character to make it even more likable and more entertaining.
Yeah, and that character became the Mickey Mouse of Blue Sky Studios. So that was really, but it was never in the script. Even in the later Ice Ages, they knew they wanted to have something with the Scrat character, but they didn't know what, and they really left it to the storyboard people to just sort of. It's all visual comedy, the Scrat doesn't really talk, it doesn't really interact with any of the other characters. So, but those kind of things you can contribute quite a bit to a story, or find an interesting angle to play with.
Is at that moment you have a certain kind of freedom? You're just such.
I like to take that freedom.
I can imagine, because sometimes it's script. It also means that there is like a certain kind of information that has to be there, like dialogue, if it's lip sync and stuff.
You have to be like you shouldn't just throw out the script, of course. But you could definitely sometimes in the script. It turns out that the image tells you everything you need to know. You don't need the character to explain it anymore. So the script changes, and you can add lines and jokes and possibilities. But it's basically trying to find, cool or dramatic ways of showing, of breaking down the story, and you have to be very aware that people are, what you're showing the audience and how you can surprise them, where you put the camera, how wide or how close you get. It's a little bit like directing in a sense. You get to control everything on your first pass, and then you present it to the director, and you begin to get feedback. You also, there's a bigger story team. Big films is often could be up to 15
people who are just exploring the story possibilities and discussing it with the director.
Yeah. And you work on, each has their own sequence, but you present it to the group, and you get feedback. Did it work? Did it not work? And the director will sort of begin to make choices, and then you do a second pass, and then of course you have to start respecting the choices. It's not my baby anymore. I need to sort of do what it needs to be for the film, and that's normal, because the second you get assigned to a sequence, that becomes in your mind the most important sequence in the film. But obviously, that you're part of a bigger story. There's a whole flow going, and maybe the bit that you're doing should only last half a minute and not run for the 10 minutes.
But isn't that difficult? I can imagine that when you do a storytelling, from A to Z, in say a 3-act story kind of structure, so it's really the build-up.
Yeah.
And you just have that kind of sequence. It's not difficult that you don't overview the overall part, because every sequence in the end, I think, but maybe that's not the case, but every sequence matters towards the development of the main character, towards the plot.
Yeah, of course.
But you're just that chain.
Well, you're working on a little part of it, but you do have a sense of the whole. But what you don't have, because you're not directing it, you don't really know what the director is shooting for. So the things that I think are funny or important, they may not be the same things that he or she finds important.
Hey, and you worked at different studios. Yep. So I see Disney, I see Blue Sky, I see Amblimation, Warner Brothers. Is that in every studio the same, or is that different kind of vibes? Is there a different way of working, for example?
Well, there's different ways of working. There's a bit more, at Warner's, it was very. It's a lot of politics. It's like any company, I guess. It's a big company. People are in their job, maybe not too happy. They'd like to do what you're doing, kind of thing. There's a lot of politics going on there. And Warner's, where I started, I worked on Quest for Camelot and Iron Giant, and they did Space Jam and a bunch of other films. It was always about, I directed Osmosis Jones there. I forget.
That's always something that we definitely should discuss.
Yeah. It was always about to be shut down. It was always there's no point in politicking, because there's not going to be a next film in which I can get your job, and and that was actually really refreshing. And when I worked at Disney, after I directed Osmosis Jones, I had a chance to be a director in development at Disney, feature animation. That was really uncomfortable because there's a lot of politics there, a lot of people who you get into your car at the end of the day, you have to like take the knives out of your back to drive home. Yeah, that's what it felt like. Yeah, it was very. People were very protective. Like at Warner, it was people would show what they were doing. There was a lot of openness, and particularly in story work, it is very important that people speak their mind and that you give your opinion, what you think works and doesn't work in a story. But that's also dangerous. A lot of American people are afraid that if they really said what they've thought, they could get in trouble. So you work in studios where if you talk with your colleagues in the story team, people are bitching and moaning and oh, I don't like that. What's the stupid idea?
So behind your back a lot.
Not behind. I was part of that team.
Yeah.
But then when it comes in, we're in a meeting with the director or the producers. Do people still really say what they mean, or do they kind of like give you the PC version or the
Is that like a dynamic that you're working from abroad in that kind of context? As I can imagine, you have to deal with that. That's a difficult thing.
Oh, well,
if that's like the dynamic in which you need to work, I think you need a lot of experience to actually don't burn out or to be really stressed out by if it goes like this, because I think it's not a healthy environment.
Well, it's the tricky thing is, like when I was directing, or I was at Blue Sky, I was head of story at some point, so you're running the story team, and you know that the director is well, struggling isn't the right word, but he's searching, he's looking for help, basically. But you have to like give people the feeling that they should really step up and say what they really think to make everything is. The idea is that working in a team like this, you have a script and the writer does his best job, and then in storyboarding you try and make the script better. You try and retell the story. Now you're not using words and letters, but you're doing.
You make it visual, like visual storytelling.
And you certain things fall away and other things become more important, and then the director takes it into editing and begins to sort of work the same story in with the element of time. That's where you learn that your 10-minute sequence really only needs to be 15 seconds, and most of your work falls out of the project. But you really need to have clear and open communication. I think that's the most important thing in probably any creative process, that you understand that you're not, you're saying things not to tear things down, but to actually help. And I think that I've found is a very, it's sort of natural to Dutch people, I think, to focus on the things that could be better. Whereas, like, joke Wilbert and I had is like, we're Dutch because we see there's a dike, there's a hole in it, so we put our finger in it. We step right into it. This is what's wrong with it. And in America, the idea is much more. Didn't we build a great dike? Yes, it's a beautiful dike, and the water is rising, and they're about to drown, but they will not. A very hard time to say this is
imperfect.
We need to make this better, and that was often quite hard to give people a sense of safety, I guess. You're invited to speak your mind, and you're not going to lose your job. But America's a very how you say,
competitive.
Yeah, and like, people can if you say the wrong things, you can get
lose your job. That is.
Yeah.
But that kind of important feedback is, I think, in storyboards, in storyboard rooms, so necessary because you're prototyping the story. So.
Yeah.
But did you saw that it then sometimes goes wrong, like really making wrong decisions more from a strategic perspective? Because It's so like I think it's always creative people that want to make the best, right?
Yeah.
If you have a story and the
Yeah.
scene doesn't work, you want. It's a strange situation that they don't tell that. Then
Well, I mean,
how can you make a good story if you can't trust your story team?
well, because
But that's experience.
who's to say what is a good story? You know, that's kind of like that's very vague. What I think is great, it may not.
But talking about like good stories, and you are like really experienced because you were like in the, how do you say, the drawing room of stories a lot.
Right.
Different big successes as well. So what do you think defining, and I know it's really broad and it's really like also by choice of a taste by a person.
Yep.
But what do you think is the most important thing of a good story?
I think if it's animation, I always feel you have to have a reason why it's animated. You know, why not shoot this film in live action and a lot easier. You know, you get great actors and they do their thing. So animation is hard. You have to have at the core. I think it has to be a really strong idea that you can only really express in animation. And that's it's visual. And it used to be. I'm talking before CGI. It used to be like talking animals. If you wanted animals to talk, it had to be animated.
Yeah.
And of course now with CGI, anything is possible. So it's gotten a lot harder to come up with a story idea that really only can be done in animation. I personally I think animation should be about comedy. It should be about sort of satire or just making. I don't really like animated films that try to make kids cry. Kind of, like, I like more the funny end of things.
But don't you need like a sad moment to make that laughing bit even stronger?
That's the other thing. That's good that you mentioned that. I feel there needs to be a sort of truth to it, and that's where I think Pixar films are really good. That they feel like they're genuinely about something. They pick a theme and they give it. They explore it from different angles and they build their story, and it has a certain truth or depth to it. And some of the other studios, they make animated films and
it's almost an algorithm.
Yeah,
they
it's
just
almost
pick some elements
by
and they
numbers,
try to
and that's also if you work in animation, can be frustrating because they're not looking to make something special. They're looking to make something that looks just as good as the last film they saw that made a lot of money, basically. And I think in animation, because you work for children, for kids, a lot of times, ideally it's a film that appeals to both adults and kids, of course. But let's say a lot of it is aimed at kids, and it's really important what you teach children, the stories you tell, because they watch these films not just once, but they over and over and over again. And it really, if it has a real message, so to speak. I don't want to sound like I have a particular message of any kind, but you have to be aware.
You want to give them a certain kind of insight.
Yeah. Or at least emotionally, it has to ring true, and that's also sort of what I bring to a story idea. Does it feel like it's got something to say? Is it about like Finding Nemo? Is I think you hear Andrew Stanton, the director, talk about it. It is all about him. And his daughter in the playground, and she's on the swing, and she wants to swing, she wants freedom, and he's pushing her, and he knows he has to do it, but he's afraid that she's gonna fall off and hurt herself, and and that's the starting point of the whole story about the character has to let go of his child and whatever, and that feels like that you can chew on that story, and kids can learn something from it in a sense, and there's other films where it's a bit like fluff and chewing gum, and there's nothing really to it. If you dig into it, there's at a certain point there's nothing to be found, kind of thing.
Yeah. And then you have that soul. Let's call it the soul or truth or like insight.
Yep.
It's the right medium. So animation was the best medium to actually translate that story.
Yep.
But then you see still it's quite difficult to make a good film.
Yeah, because it's difficult to make a good film anyway, I think. And
but you like in the story room, what then are you looking for that it will work? Is it the good doses of humor versus drama? Is it like making it really round and layered? How do you
I think it's about all those things. But initially, in feature animation, it's a lot about finding out the shape of it, so to speak. It's working with the director and the producers and the team. Basically, is this what we want to do? And then at some point, you find some things that really work, and it begins to sort of begins to gel. And then suddenly you begin to understand, okay, this is the kind of story we're telling, and then you know what the right choices are and the wrong choices.
Yeah.
But first, unless you have a situation where people, and that happens also, people come in, directors come in, and they just have something set in their mind that has to be like this, and they're not interested to listen to any other opinions. That's hard because it means that you're
executing
what they call a wrist. You just do the drawings and don't think about it and don't have any ideas because that can be. I've worked on films where there were more live action directors, and in live action, directors they work with storyboards sometimes, but they break the scene down or the scenes down into shots. So you'd get like a shopping list where I need a medium shot of this, then a close up of this. And so everything was very, set in stone, and that's what you were supposed to draw. So you didn't have the freedom to just sort of play around with it and try out different things, And I think it's a very wasteful process because a lot of stuff you come up with never winds up in the film.
In the basement. Yeah.
But in that search, you could stumble onto some really funny ideas that you would never have found if you didn't go that deep, so to speak. That's sort of the very you have to be kind of thick-skinned in storyboarding. You have to not really care that your ideas
don't be too sensitive about it. Yeah. Kill your darlings all the time.
Kill your darlings, or so you have your pitch, you do your best to sell it, and then if they don't want it.
Hey, and then you got in the opportunity to direct your own film, Osmosis Jones, and we were just discussing, okay, the animation is the medium, and then you immediately make it yourself really difficult because it was like live action and animation combined with a quite like, how do you say, challenging story to tell.
Yep.
So as a director, with that knowledge in the storyboard rooms, etc., was it a different experience?
It was
because then you are calling the shots.
Well, yes and no. I think in reality, in animation, directors have not as high a status as they have in live action. Not like your Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg, where they, and because animation takes a long time. It's just making drawings. So it's really hard to get the kind of, to have as much influence on the story as you would have maybe as a live action director. Osmosis Jones was difficult because it was, let's say, 80% animated and 20% live action. Mm-hmm. And the live action ultimately was directed by the Farrelly brothers, who were very famous from Something About Mary and Me, Myself, and Irene, I think. So whatever they said that's what we were doing. And me and my colleague, I had a colleague, Tom Sido, directing the animation. We could say anything or try to convince them, but if they stuck to their guns and wanted to do it a certain way, that was it. And it was really tough because for them it was just a thing they did on the side as a favor to Warner's, essentially. And I suspect they never really watched the animation part. So it was really weird. You had like On the inside of Osmosis Jones, it takes place inside the body of Bill Murray, basically. It was like a 24-hour virus. I mean, it's very at this point with Corona,
it's an actual theme.
Very urgent message. Well, wash your hands and everything. And but they would have live action scenes where we scene with Bill Murray and some other actors, and they'd go like, "Well, I'll see you next week." Then we cut back to the body inside, and we're in this. It was very, very tough film to make. I have a before and after picture. My driver's license before I started directing this film, I looked like a young and hopeful, and lots of
energy,
dreams and energy. And then by the time I'm done with this film, my hair turned gray. It's like you see presidents, with the exception of Trump, remained looking the same, but most presidents.
Yeah, they have a
don't look
time.
Quite as.
What was your most important lesson from that experience?
Well, I had a really great time. I'm really proud of the film.
It's a beautiful film. Everybody should watch it for sure.
And I think it was a perfect premise for animation because it was cells in the human body or world inside the human body. So it's not something you can do in live action the realism didn't come into play. And at the time, animation was it was the time of Prince of Egypt and Spirit at DreamWorks, very sort of almost like hyper-realistic animation and acting. And we were doing a cartoon that was supposed to be fun. It was really, it wasn't based on a story or a fairy tale. It was like an original story the writer Mark Hyman came up with, who was a young guy and he'd grown up liking animation. So it was a whole new, had a lot of like really cool new things going for it. And from a design point of view, you had to sort of invent this world and what the characters would look like. It was all great, but it was also very challenging because you had to, fight for to make it a good film. And it was very interesting to work with the Farrelly brothers, but also complicated. It was, I don't know. So what you learn is that it's like it's a great job, and I came away with I'd love to do it again. And that time maybe I would be a little bit more in charge, because it's all like making compromises and I had that opportunity many years later when I went back to the Netherlands to do Heinz, the film Heinz, but it's really rare. In America, it's really rare to have real control over the project, because it's understandable, because it's very expensive projects, and the studio invests lots of money, and the idea is to make a profit. So yeah, they're gonna look over your shoulder.
In that sense. Yeah. All right. Really interesting, like all that experience. We were also discussing storyboards. We are now heading for more beatboards. What for you is the most important difference between like doing the storyboards and then actually go towards the beatboards?
I think actually beatboards is like a stage before you get the storyboarding. It's almost like illustrating a book. So you have the storyline or the script, and you sometimes it's just an outline you have, and you do drawings that explore possibility in the story and try and do it like an illustration in a book, basically. So it tells a story, and you look at different opportunities. So these are for.
So you're telling the story in one simple, clear illustration.
Clear, and it kind of looks cinematic. It looks like it's an action scene, or there's some funny things in it. So it gives a flavor, and they do these things to kind of feel out the story, and also to do presentations, because it's still a long time. You're still selling. You still have to make presentations to the studio and convince the studio heads that this is a good story to be telling. It's like exploring possibilities, exploring jokes, and sometimes you can do a drawing like that, and that could spark a whole change in the script, like something you bring to the story, and they get rid of what wasn't that, and in place of that, they put in your story. So the next slide, I think you see, or one of the next slides. So this is for one of my own children that never got made yet.
Yes, but it's still there.
I shouldn't give up
So
hope.
if there is like somebody with some money, please make this.
Don't hesitate. But these are for Rio 2, the second Rio film, and that was for a sequence in the opening of the film that was very heavy on dialogue, and it wasn't all that funny. And I came up with a more visual and fun way to open the film. I did a whole bunch of these beatboard drawings, and then you'd present it to the director and basically tell the story. How about we attack it like this? And that was that he liked it, and so he assigned me to do the storyboard version of it, and I did like I don't know how many versions of that opening, and it's ultimately what's in the film. So
you came up with that idea. Is that like where do you get that knowledge from to tell it like this? So maybe it's like, of course, by experience, doing it a lot. But is it like do you look a lot to films or read a lot of like? Are there like specific books you're looking for, or is it still referring to your background with your television and drama studies in Utrecht?
I think I probably watched a lot of movies. And you just, what's interesting, it's like you read something and it doesn't really, rock your world, then you begin to get ideas like, why don't we do it like this, And one of the things I've learned is that it's easy to make something better because there's something there and you react to it and, well, if we did this, it would already be better. It's a lot harder if there's nothing there and you're supposed to make something that's good.
Yeah.
Because then, then you're on a blank page and any line you draw, like, well, is that the best line? Or that's a lot more difficult. So if you read a script and you begin to sort of you try to sort of piece it together and follow the story and or the arc of the character, like he's supposed to learn something in the course of the story. And then you have a measuring stick. You can see if this scene that's written helps to express that storyline, yes or no. And if it doesn't really help, then you can begin to think about, okay, what if we did it like this, and then it would help to tell his story. And that's where you can convince directors.
It's really interesting because I'm a teacher.
Okay.
And I at the Master Institute of Visual Culture and teaching Master of Animation.
Okay.
And a big problem, what is always like a challenge is actually that people start making stuff. So they actually put it on the table. So what you mentioned is like, it's really important that it should be there first, so you can work on it and make it better. But like a lot of people are trying to solve the problems already in their head. Yep. So like they are thinking at night, they are plotting out their story in their head, and then they think it works. That's not how it works, right? That's also a little bit how I got from your experience.
I did a bunch of workshops, some of them at the NIAF when it still existed, and that's exactly right. And independent filmmakers, a lot of them wake up, they've had a dream, and it has to be like that. And what I always try to teach them is sort of the American experience, that you can work, you have something, and it's, of course, you need to generate something first, but then you can begin to play with it and just examine it. And what does this idea that you've dreamt about, does it really help to tell the story? First, you need to identify what's your story about.
Yeah, and it's really easy to dream, right? So you win thousands of Oscars in your head, but then actually make it and make it work, it's much more difficult. And the struggle that I sometimes face is that like students, or starting animators or starting filmmakers, like sitting somewhere in a living room or in a cafe just thinking. But it can actually be work right from 9 to 6, just work on your story and make it work and make little beat boards, make little storyboards, like thumbnails, block it out your story and just shuffle it like a puzzle and test it with each other.
Show it to other people and get feedback. When I did my very first film, when Gerrit van Dijk helped me to make my very first film, it was gonna be like a 3-minute film, and it took me years to make it. I did it like this, and nobody, even my family, couldn't know what it was about. It had to be a surprise, because I felt like if I show them,
Magic is gone.
they know what it's going to be. They go, oh, well, okay, that's nice. And I'm stuck 2 more years to draw it. And that film is probably, I thought about it a lot in bars and all over the place, but it didn't communicate. When you saw the final film, just people appreciated the animation, the motion, and everything that kind of worked. But the storyline was like, if I try to explain it, okay, maybe, but they didn't come across. And that's what I learned, that with Dada, for instance, I purposely went to make a cartoon that was supposed to make people laugh in the right places. And because that's very honest. If you show your film and nobody laughs, it didn't really work.
Really good job.
And I showed films as I was making it to a lot of people to get their feedback, and they would give you notes and ideas. It doesn't mean you have to follow those ideas, but I always feel you do have to take them seriously, and just if somebody trips on something in your story, and they say, well, why don't you do it like this? It doesn't mean that you have to do it like they say, but you do have to look at that moment in the film, and how can I make that better? And then you show it again to somebody else, and if they don't trip over it, then you've made progress. And that's kind of the process. Simply put, in America, you keep working and needing the same.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be perfect, because that was also something that you mentioned. Like when you put your drawing on the wall, it feels like okay.
Yeah.
But it's also a way of a visual language, like a word, right?
Yeah.
You're just trying to find the right word to explain what you're meaning.
Yeah.
And it's a word. It's not a piece of art all the time.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is not like, it feels like when you make a drawing, when you're starting off, that they will consider it as art, but it's actually trying to make a solution, or it's like an option within storytelling instead of you're judged by how the way it's drawn.
Yeah, the idea should, like it. If I don't like an idea, they assign me to do some drawings on ideas I don't like. I really try and make it look as good as I possibly can, because that way they can't say, it'll be clear that they don't like the idea, not because the drawing is crappy, it's beautifully drawn to the best of my abilities, but what I'm drawing is really a bad idea. And that's almost like that's the trick that you do. Because you're communicating with, you're trying to sort of convince people that's your way of looking at it is the better way or something. But
and here you see story concepts, and you were already like discussing about it, and there are some like notes.
Yep. This is something I really enjoy. That's if you know the world that the story takes place in. This is from Epic Blue Sky. Suppose it's a classic type of story about little people, fairies, essentially living in the woods. And what is that civilization like? So you begin to sort of explore, what could these characters, what could their day look like, and how could they, and so you generate lots of ideas. And I always like this, very free. You just and some of these things, they wind up in the stories. None of these, I think.
But this is what you like most of storytelling, to find these little scenes that can end up of shots, or like little ideas that can be like comical situations.
Explore, it's I guess, I don't know, it's what actors, I think, do that, in the sense that they're supposed to play a character, and then they begin to construct for themselves the life story of that character. He went to school here, and he was good at math, but it's never going to come into the film in any way. But it does inform the acting, and that's sort of in story what you sort of do. You have to take the story very seriously, and you have to take these characters very seriously, because you have to make them real for yourself. There's an element of truth, so to speak. And what does it mean? What does it mean to be to be a little fairy in the forest and to live with with foxes and you could have fun riding around on chicks and you take a bath in a walnut shell and things like. It gets into design also, like.
Yeah, and I think what is interesting also is actually by normally when people they sometimes solve it by drawing, like for instance world building.
Yeah.
So they start with a character and
Yeah.
then they try to fit the character with the buildings and the
Yeah.
buildings with the environment, and
Right.
so slowly it becomes a world in which
Yeah.
you can tell stories. But I think this is also quite interesting to see actually that you're thinking about like situations.
Yeah.
And you think about, okay, this is like the main protagonist and this
Yeah.
is how his 24/7 looks like.
Yeah.
That also can lead to a certain kind of world
Yeah, it
building.
can lead
because
to,
you're-
or like the idea is at the bottom that you see these in nature. There's these like rolled up things. Because the designs for this movie looked very realistic, like really just like little people, and they didn't have a sense of fantasy. And this was my attempt that maybe they look like regular ears, but they're really sort of these twirled up.
like insect-like.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And that didn't go anywhere. But those kind of things like on Rio 2, for instance, was a story about the family we know from the first movie goes into to live with their relatives in the jungle. So now you have parrots that live in the wild and let's say domesticated parrots. How are they different? How do they act differently? And you try and put it in your boards. It's ways like a real bird in nature. They can hang upside down. They can turn their. I try to build those things into my storyboards, and then by comparison, the birds who came from the human world basically act like humans. They walk around 2 feet. They shake hands, and if you have those sort of, and they're not like you don't highlight them, but they're there. They add to the texture of the film, so to speak, and make your story, just more fun and more imaginative. This is from Tale of Despro, I think.
Yeah.
And that had a world of rats in the sewers, I think, and there's a whole society of them, and what kind of things could you see, and then you get an assignment to just come up with some ideas, and you try and imagine, what they would find in that world, because it's bones and disgusting things, and or they sell maggots and something that just get like you do a whole bunch of drawings, then you present them, and some of them, like I think the guy with the snake charmer with a worm
this
in an
one here on
apple,
the top. Yeah.
that actually made it into the film, I think. The rest, didn't. It's I get to show them now.
Hey, and working on these kind of features, because we just saw a lot of them, like
Yeah.
features. But it's a total different way of telling a story than, for instance, a short like Dada.
Yep.
You have like a 10-minute max,
Yep.
8 minutes, something like that was the duration of that film, I
Yep.
think. And then you have this like 85-minute kind of featurettes.
Yep.
The total different world. What do you? Is it like you're more focusing on feature film like you did Heinz, or do you say, okay, but I sometimes also like the doability or the of like a short film and make it as rich as a feature?
Well, I think I like both. I do think most of the ideas I get are sort of feature length. That's probably because I've been doing it for a long, long time, and also because it has short animation is still. You can't make a living doing that. There's still sort of a labor of love. And certainly in America, it's like if I would tell people kind of money you could get from the Dutch film fund to make an animated short, they would not believe it, because that's unheard of there. So it's really rare to be able to do that. And I think I would love to do a short film.
Dada 2,
or something, preferably
no,
something else.
But like it's really interesting, of course, something else. But I can imagine that with that amount of experience that you gain in the past years in Hollywood, etc., and would have done Dada the same, and now you would have like a new opportunity to do a short. That would be, I really would look.
Yeah, I would love to, and also because it's with new technologies, it's actually it's a lot more easier to do. So you could do things in the computer, and a lot of the what used to make animation extra hard when I started with Dada and was drawings and all the work you had to put in. So that's, I think, a lot of people were interested in animation until they found out just how much tedious work it is.
But most of the time went into the production.
Yeah.
Like for what I was from the same situation, so doing cells, cleaning and drawing, blah blah blah. So the creative part was like quite small because within that time you had to do so much production, and there was no. We already discussed it like in the pre-talk. We were like we don't have the Control-Z button.
Yeah, now it's a lot more. You can make mistakes and correct them, and a lot of like to paint your animation is you could click on a button, and still a big job, but it's
doable.
It's not like you with paint. Like the very first film I did, I talked about. I animated it blind, so to speak. Like I didn't shoot any. I didn't make any animation tests. So I did all these drawings, and then finally I took this big spider drawings to Gerrit van Dijk's
line tester,
and I shot it on film. And then for the first time, I saw what I had made, and I could see then that it moved okay, but the story didn't quite work. But I still had to finish it. I still had to like copy all those drawings onto cells, and then all those cells I needed to paint. All this work, and I did it hoping and praying that maybe in color it'll
it will work.
Well, it still didn't work, So it's a very like it wasn't for everybody, and I think now with computer and it's a lot more achievable, and software like Flash you can use and different different animation softwares. It's a lot more. It's easier in a sense for.
Flash unfortunately is not there anymore with us, but like Toon Boom is and TV Paint and all that. There's like because back then you need like hundreds of thousands of euros to buy Betacam and film and celluloid and paint and all that kind of stuff, and now it's
like it was just like with Dada you have to like you put real cells underneath the camera with lights, and the lights is going to refract and make weird oily spots in your image, and you have to climb up the ladder to look through the lens to see if they're gone, and it's a lot of work.
Do you miss that? Because now I see in the let's call it the post-digital generation that they really have a love for the skills and the look and the feel and the tangibility of drawing on your animation disc and paper and scan and color it. But you experience it all from that till now.
I don't really miss that. I think
me neither.
I hope for them they can just have a slider where they can just like make it look more handmade. I don't know if that's the case, but it was a really good way to do a short film like Dada. Means you perform every possible function, every job in the filmmaking process. You wrote the script, you made the storyboards, you did the animation, you did the coloring, you did the camera, and that means later on when I was directing things and working with bigger teams, I knew what people were doing. So you understand the job that they're doing, and that really helped me to sort of
to have an overview of everything.
I think that's important in that sense, and I think for students also it's still really important to make your own film and to learn everything, all the mistakes you can make. That's the great thing about shorts. I think if you're really in charge and it's your idea, everything that's good about it is your job, and everything that is really bad about it, you can't hide behind anybody else. And in a bigger production, you can always go like, well, I didn't listen to me. but now it's a bad film, you know. And I think short animation is very honest, and it's a great way also to, as a calling card. To I think that's why it really works for me that way. It was a way when I got to America with Dada, I could show what I had done. When I was working at Warner's, things were very slow in the beginning. There was a lot of waiting around and nothing to do really. And in that time, I directed T.R.A.N.S.I.T, my second film, T.R.A.N.S.I.T, which was like it was a way more ambitious film stylistically than Dada was. And it had teams of different animators. Michael Dudok de Wit, you know, very famous now, actually did a segment of that film as well. And I was doing that under the eyes of Warner. It was very much in the open. And I think that really helped me to give them confidence that this guy, he could maybe direct a feature film. So things you do in your short films can really help you to sort of, you know, to escape from the pigeonhole they put you in. Because that is true in this sort of bigger studio animation, that you get like pegged. You're like a story person, and you're like an animator, and it's really hard to transition into a different kind of job.
To explore different roles.
Because you're good at what you're doing, so you're a good animator, but nobody knows yet you're an unproven story person, or the other way around. And it doesn't help the production if you lose a good animator and you get a mediocre story person. So the interest of the studio is to keep you in your place, essentially. And that's I learned that at Amblimation also, because it's like there was back in the hand-drawn feature animation, so you had like in-betweeners and assistant animators, and then the animators, and they were all looking, you know, to climb the ladder and get a break. And that's sort of, even though the studio wants you to develop, but it doesn't really, it's not in their interest. They're better off with good
having that chain in the bigger machine, and should well function.
Yeah. Yeah, because then you pull your weight, and I don't know. It's also a lot about team building. This whole over the course of, if you work at a studio for a number of years, together you learn more and more of the craft, and then, you know, the next film should go a little bit easier, and you've learned a great many things.
Hey, with that experience, by doing shorts yourself and running through all that, because you were in the position to be in an animation and doing a directing of a film and being in the storyboard, come back to the Netherlands. You came back to the Netherlands. You did Heinz. What changed? What actually changed from
in the Netherlands, you mean?
Yeah, in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I think a lot has changed. A lot of. And this, I think, is mainly due to things like the internet, and so you have somewhere where you can show your work. That used to be a really big problem in the times of Dada.
I was distribute it and find the stage for
it. You couldn't get them on TV because they didn't fit in the TV format, because they were, you know, 7 minutes and 35 seconds, and not what they should be to be on TV. And on the internet, it's like anything goes, really.
Put it on YouTube.
And it's also, I think that's a big change, and the fact that there's software like Toon Boom and Flash or Animate or you know, all these different things that make it that you don't have to rely on a big government funding to buy your paper and cells and all that time. I think a lot of it has become more attainable in a sense. And I think also in I don't have a really, I think in schools, in different art schools, people are more practical. In the day when I did Dada, there was nowhere you could learn animate like they did in Disney films, or even like discouraged to a sense. Like one of the young animators who worked with me on Dada, animator called Arjan Wilschut, who's still is a great director now and worked on many things. Um, he he was studying in Rotterdam, I think, at the Rotterdam Academy, and they got a very simple animation assignment. It's a box. You had to spin the box around, but he loved to animate, so he did this box that took him probably like 5 seconds to make those sketches. Then he had a cat jump out of the box and run around the box and jump back in. He got a really bad grade because that wasn't.
It was a rotating box.
So he really got, he quit the academy because he couldn't learn there what he wanted to learn. It was like if you wanted to do Disney, then you had to do higher art.
It was cursing in the church back then.
Yeah, and then I think, as he tells the story, a year later he went to sort of an open exhibition for the program. So they were showcasing what you could learn, and sure enough, his little animation test with the cat was presented proudly by the school. Like, you could come here and learn how to do this, and which wasn't really true. But I think academies, art schools are more. There's more people, students showing up who want to sort of learn the craft, so to speak, and work on more commercial type projects. Where I think when I left the Netherlands, it was more
narrow-minded. It's more open-minded and more connected to the creative industry.
Yeah, art for art's sake kind of thing. Other than that, it's obviously still Holland is still. It's a tiny market, and we have this weird language, and we have this weird
humor.
Yeah, and we have also there's not enough because all the different broadcasting corporations are like divided, splintered. So there's not enough money basically to make to fund like really original Dutch TV series or feature films. That's I think is still a struggle. So it was when I got back, it was. A lot has changed, but also some things hadn't changed. There were still people standing around drinking beers and complaining about how difficult it is to get something going. But I think the circumstances are a lot better. It's easier to if you really want to, if you have the energy, you can make an animated short on your computer at home. And you have a way to put it out into the world, you can submit it to different festivals. No longer, it used to be a big deal that you had to get like prints of your film, and again, through the government, had to be shipped to different festivals. And now with digital, it's a lot more easy to get your work out there. And that's ultimately, you make great opportunities for yourself. And there's also quite a few really cool, young and energetic studios in the Netherlands now, like Kaching in Rotterdam and Submarine in Amsterdam. They do all sorts of really interesting projects, and they bring work from abroad and do it in the Netherlands, which that didn't really exist when I left.
No, either. But that's like a really, really, really positive development, that there is like work for animators, right? They bring in work, and they bring experience by bringing the directors to the Netherlands as well, and having this kind of co-productions.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really good.
So I think it's really. I think the future looks.
Yeah, the future. That was my question. What do you think the future of animation will bring for the upcoming 10 years? We see like some. I'm just giving some changement, like streaming platforms are much more serious. You see real-time technology. There is like a huge demand for animation at this moment. Do you think that will be the future there, or do you already see some changement coming up, or dangers?
Well, I think that a lot of the things that I grew up with and you grew up with maybe are about to change or are changing. Like the streaming platforms is at the moment in America, there's like incredible boom. Netflix and Amazon and Disney
and
Plus.
Much more coming up.
They're all. It makes me think a little bit of the time when I got started in America, and people wanted to sort of imitate the success of Lion King or replicate it. Now all these streaming companies are trying to create animation, because animation is a way to sort of get the kids. If the kids want to see something on Netflix, That means the parents
We'll
are
buy
gonna,
the subscription.
yeah, will subscribe to Netflix, and but it's no longer about like we're going to bring these films into the theaters. And but in my the films I worked on was all about like we have to have a good opening weekend, and hopefully the film will have legs and will stay in the theaters for long enough to make
Make the
enough
money.
to make the money back.
Yeah.
And now it's like it's funded through Netflix. It's I think it's great because it allows there's less. They have to be less pure commercial in a sense, so they could take risks. Like I've worked on a film, Pinocchio, done in stop motion in Oregon, directed and conceived by Guillermo del Toro, live action, very with a big reputation, very original take on things. And that is the story of Pinocchio, which we all know, of course, but told against the backdrop of the rise of fascism in Italy. It's not exactly for kids per se. It's very bleak, pretty dark. But yeah, and it's being funded by Netflix, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be in their catalog. And if ever you watch, I don't know, Hellboy or some other Guillermo del Toro film, you'll probably get a suggestion, like if you like this, you probably like this. And so that film can find an audience.
And it's international, right?
Yeah.
So it's like all over the world. So you're not like just focusing on American audiences, but like global. Yeah.
But the question is if that's going to keep on going, or if at some point it's like a bubble. And at the moment, there's a lot of things happening in animation, series, and all for the streaming networks. But meanwhile, the cinemas are sort of, are in trouble.
In difficult times. Yeah.
And TV networks also, because people watch things on their phone or on the iPad, and
it's on demand.
So all these sort of habits are changing. And but I think in all that, animation is in pretty good shape because there's a lot of things are happening, and I don't know. There's new technologies that I don't even
but
dream about.
Like the production process is much quicker. That's like the thing nowadays, right? So you're now, when I was doing 3D animation, you had to wait like for a long time for rendering. And that will change to almost real time. You have like such an advanced technology with lighting and colors, etc. So it's almost like what you see is what you get, kind of virtual production assets in 3D. What took years actually to produce in earlier stages. So having a great idea and executing it and testing it out with an audience, that's like, animation was like, how do you say, work made by people with a lot of patience, and that's like changing a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And video games, of course, is like
interactive animation.
That's going to be that's probably bigger at this point already, bigger than animation for the theaters kind of thing. So all these things, I'm happy to be on the story end of it. I'd like to write. I think personally, I would like to sort of move in that direction more and just come up with ideas and things and let other people worry about how to really finance them and get them. And to deal in ideas and possibilities. Basically, it's very. We still need that, no matter what the technology, no matter what the application of the animation. You still need, it still needs to interest people and grab their attention, and that's
the core of
it. That's the cool part of it, I think. And a lot of animation is really, you have to be, now less so than before, but you have to be really patient and because you're making something. If you do it right, you've made something that'll live on without you, like Dada. You could still show all over the world. People understand it and appreciate it. And I don't even have to be in the room to make them feel guilty that they should really laugh. So yeah, that's great. You really make something that has a life, so to speak. And
I always say to my students like that actually making an animation like Dada costs you life, but it also reanimates life. So in that sense, you giving something of your time, your life, that you could play around with your kids or walk through the forest or enjoy a beer. all that time you put into that film actually lives through your animation film.
Yeah, and you get like it's. I mean, short animation. It's rare that you encounter somebody who's actually seen your work, and but sometimes it happens, and that's really really nice. You haven't like these short films for me are a long long time ago, and I would, like I said, I think I would like to get back to it. The only thing is, for me, it doesn't have this this calling card function anymore. So I'm not proving anything, and I'm also I don't know. So, but if I come up with an idea and I really care enough about it to put in that energy, then that would be really fun.
I would look forward to it.
Well,
All
thank you.
right. Thank you so much, Piet, for sharing all your knowledge, all your experiences, all the great art, and all your insights with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Playgrounds in Depth with Piet Kroon. And see you next time in another episode soon on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much, and don't forget to subscribe. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.